Sometimes one kind act can change everything. She let a homeless man into her home, and what he did to her shocked everyone. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others. Your support helps us create even more powerful stories. The streets of the small town were empty, illuminated only by the dim glow of the street lights. Sarah walked home from her shift at the local store, her footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The town was a place where nothing extraordinary ever happened, where routines were set and life moved at a predictable pace. But tonight, something caught her attention. As she passed the small park near her apartment, she noticed a man sitting alone on a worn-out bench. His clothes were tattered, his posture slouched, and his face was hidden behind an unkempt beard. The sight was not uncommon. There were always a few homeless individuals in town, but something about him made her stop. There was a glimmer in his eyes, barely visible through the strands of messy hair, as if there was still life inside him despite his situation. Sarah hesitated for a moment. Most people would walk by pretending not to see him, but she had never been one to ignore those in need. Taking a deep breath, she approached. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked gently. The man barely lifted his head. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't seem hostile. If anything, he looked exhausted, drained of energy. "I'm fine," he muttered. "You don't look fine," she said, sitting on the edge of the bench. "Have you eaten today?" The man exhaled as if tired of answering such questions. "Not really, but it's nothing new." Sarah nodded, glancing around the park. It was late, and the air was getting colder. Leaving him here didn't sit right with her. "I live nearby," she said. "I can make you a meal, and if you want, you can take a shower, just for tonight." The man turned his head slightly, finally looking at her properly. His eyes, though tired, carried a trace of skepticism. People didn't usually offer help without expecting something in return. "Why?" he asked. "Because I can," she replied simply. "Because everyone deserves kindness." For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he gave a small nod. "All right," he said. Sarah smiled. "Great. My name's Sarah, by the way." "David," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. Together, they walked through the quiet streets with David a few steps behind, as if unsure whether he could trust her. When they reached her apartment, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, gesturing for him to follow. The space was small but cozy, decorated with warm colors and simple furniture. It wasn't much, but it was home. David hesitated at the entrance, as if stepping into a stranger's home after so long felt unnatural. "You can sit down," she said, heading toward the kitchen. "I'll make something quick." David lowered himself onto the couch cautiously. He watched as she moved around the kitchen, preparing a meal as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. The smell of food filled the apartment, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something unfamiliar. Comfort. After a few minutes, Sarah placed a plate in front of him. Warm soup, a sandwich, and a glass of water. Simple, but more than he'd had in days. "Eat," she encouraged. David picked up the spoon, tasting the soup carefully, as if unsure whether he could trust it. But the moment the warmth hit his stomach, he realized just how hungry he was. He ate slowly at first, then with more urgency. Sarah didn't say anything. She just sat nearby, giving him space. After he finished, she gestured toward the hallway. "The bathroom's down there. There are fresh towels, and you can borrow some clothes I keep for donations." David hesitated again, but eventually nodded. He stood, moving toward the bathroom. While he was gone, Sarah cleaned up the dishes and took a deep breath. She hadn't planned on bringing home a stranger tonight, but something told her she had done the right thing. When David finally emerged, the transformation was striking. He was still the same man, but the grime was gone. His hair was damp, and he looked more like a person than a shadow of one. His posture was more relaxed, and his face, now free of dirt, revealed a man who once had a different life. Sarah was taken aback for a moment. She hadn't expected such a difference. "Feel better?" she asked. David gave a small nod. "Yeah, I do." She smiled. "Good. You can sleep here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure things out." David hesitated, looking at her with an unreadable expression. He wasn't used to kindness, but for now, he decided not to question it. "Thank you," he said softly. Sarah simply nodded. "Get some rest." As she turned off the lights and went to her own room, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than she had anticipated. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the small apartment. Sarah stretched as she got out of bed, her thoughts immediately drifting to her unexpected guest. She had always been the kind of person who helped others without expecting anything in return, but something about David felt different. There was a weight in his eyes last night, a heaviness that lingered beyond hunger and exhaustion. She wondered what had happened to him. Stepping into the living room, she saw David sitting on the couch, fully awake. He looked different in the daylight, clean, but still carrying the weariness of someone who had spent too many nights without a home. His posture was tense, as if he wasn't sure whether he truly belonged in this space. "Morning," she greeted with a warm smile. David nodded. "Morning. Did you sleep okay?" "Better than I have in a long time," he admitted. "Good," she said, heading towards the kitchen. "I'll make some breakfast." David hesitated, watching her move around effortlessly, as if having a stranger in her home was the most normal thing in the world. "You don't have to do all this, you know." "I know," she replied simply, cracking eggs into a pan. "But I want to." Silence stretched between them. David seemed lost in thought, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee. Finally, he spoke. "You're different from most people." Sarah glanced at him over her shoulder. "How so?" "Most wouldn't even look at me, let alone invite me into their home." She shrugged. "People judge too quickly. I've been on the other side before." David raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Sarah set 2 plates on the table and sat across from him. "When I was a kid, my family had nothing. We lived paycheck to paycheck, sometimes not even that. I remember being hungry, scared, and wondering if things would ever get better. But there was this one woman, a neighbor. She helped us when no one else did, brought food, gave my mom a job when no one else would. She didn't have to, but she did. That's why I believe in helping people, because I know what it's like to need it." David stared at her as if seeing her in a new light. "And now you help people because someone once helped you." Sarah nodded. "Exactly." David toyed with his fork, pushing his food around absent-mindedly. "I had a life once, a good one, a job, a home, people who depended on me. Then everything fell apart." She waited, sensing that he wasn't used to opening up. "What happened?" He exhaled sharply. "Bad business decisions, trusted the wrong people, lost everything. After that, it was one thing after another. When you hit rock bottom, people stop seeing you as a person. You become invisible." Sarah listened without interrupting. She had met people with similar stories before, but there was something raw in David's voice that struck a chord. "You're not invisible to me," she said softly. David's gaze met hers, and for the first time there was something other than guardedness in his eyes. They finished breakfast in silence, but it was a comfortable one. As the day went on, David seemed more at ease, but there was still hesitation in his movements, as if he was waiting for her to change her mind about him. Sarah didn't push. She knew trust wasn't built overnight. In the afternoon, she pulled out a bag of clothes. "I was going to donate these, but you can take whatever fits." David looked at the clothes, then at her. "You really don't expect anything in return?" "Nope," she said with a small smile. He shook his head, almost in disbelief. "You're something else, Sarah." By evening, David had started to relax. They sat in the living room talking about nothing and everything. He told her about the places he had traveled, the people he had met before his life unraveled. Sarah found herself enjoying his company, realizing that despite his circumstances, he had a sharp mind and a sense of humor that peeked through the cracks of his guarded exterior. As the night deepened, David finally admitted something he had been holding back. "You know, last night when you found me, I wasn't sure I'd make it through another day." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "David?" "But you changed that," he interrupted. "You reminded me that there are still good people in the world." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Everyone deserves kindness, David, even when the world tells them otherwise." He nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." For the first time in a long time, David felt something unfamiliar: hope. The next morning, the air inside the apartment felt lighter, as if the weight of unspoken pain had begun to lift. Sarah prepared coffee, the rich aroma filling the small kitchen. She glanced towards the couch where David had slept. He was already awake, sitting with his hands clasped together, lost in thought. She wondered if he had slept at all. "Good morning," she greeted, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. David nodded. "Morning, thanks." He took the cup, warming his hands against it before taking a slow sip. Sarah sat across from him, stirring her own drink. There was something different in his posture today, less guarded, as if he was slowly allowing himself to feel comfortable. "You have any plans for today?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. David let out a dry chuckle. "Plans? I haven't had plans in years." Sarah smiled. "Well, maybe it's time to change that." David sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. "I don't even know where to start." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a slightly crumpled envelope. He slid it across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked, frowning slightly. "Open it," he said simply. Sarah hesitated before carefully tearing the envelope open. As soon as she saw what was inside, her breath caught in her throat. A thick stack of bills, far more money than she had ever seen in one place before. She blinked, trying to make sense of it. "David, what is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. $100,000, he said, watching her reaction. "It's yours." Sarah stared at him, completely stunned. Her mind raced, trying to understand. I don't understand. Why are you giving me this?" David leaned back, watching her closely. "Because I wanted to see if real kindness still existed. I've been living on the streets for a while now, testing people, trying to see if anyone would help without expecting something in return. Most don't even look at me. But you didn't hesitate. You saw me as a person, not just some homeless guy, and that means something." Sarah felt her heartbeat quicken. "David, are you telling me you're not actually homeless?" A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Not exactly. I was once. But I came into money a while ago, enough to rebuild my life. But something felt wrong. I couldn't just go back to my old ways without knowing if there was still good left in the world. So I decided to find out. You were the only one who passed the test." Sarah exhaled sharply, struggling to wrap her head around what she was hearing. "So this was a test?" David nodded. "In a way, yes. But it wasn't just about me testing you. I also needed to see for myself if people like you still exist. And you proved that they do." She looked down at the money again, her fingers trembling slightly. "I can't take this," she murmured. "Yes, you can," David said firmly. "And you should. You've spent your life helping others. Now let someone help you." Sarah shook her head, still overwhelmed. "I don't need this for myself." David leaned forward. "Then use it for something bigger. Help more people. Do what you do best." For a long moment, she was silent, staring at the money as if it might disappear at any second. Then, slowly, her expression changed. An idea began to form in her mind. "You really believe in what you're doing, don't you?" she asked, meeting his gaze. David nodded. "I do. And I believe in you." Sarah took a deep breath. "Then I won't waste this. I'll use it to make a difference." A genuine smile spread across David's face. "I knew you would." At that moment, Sarah realized that her life had just changed in ways she never could have imagined, and this was only the beginning. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, but instead of fear, she felt a deep sense of purpose. She had spent years helping in small ways, giving meals to those in need, offering kindness where she could. But now, she had the means to do something bigger, and she was determined not to waste it. With the money David had given her, she began the process of creating a small community outreach center. She found a vacant building on the edge of town, an old bakery that had been closed for years, and arranged to rent it. She used part of the funds to renovate it, transforming the space into something warm and inviting. The front room became a gathering space, with a kitchen for serving meals and shelves stocked with donated clothes. There were small offices in the back, where volunteers could help people find jobs, housing, and medical assistance. At first, the idea met resistance. Some in the town viewed the homeless as a problem rather than people in need. Others questioned why Sarah, a simple store clerk, was suddenly taking on such a big responsibility. But she refused to be discouraged. She reached out to local businesses, community leaders, and anyone who would listen. Slowly, the tide began to turn. David watched the process from a distance, always there but never interfering. He had given Sarah the money, but what she was building was entirely her own. He had tested her kindness, and now she was proving that it hadn't been a one-time gesture. One afternoon, Sarah stood in the center of the nearly completed outreach building, looking at what had once been just an idea in her mind. The walls were freshly painted, the floors cleaned, the furniture donated by people who had come to believe in her vision. The sign above the door read "The Haven," a place for those who had nowhere else to turn. She turned to David, who had been quietly watching from the doorway. "It's almost ready," she said, pride evident in her voice. He nodded. "You've done something incredible, Sarah." "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. David shook his head. "No, I gave you money, but this," he gestured around the room, "this was all you." She smiled, but there was something else in her eyes, something thoughtful. "Why did you really do this, David? Why test people like that?" David was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Because when I lost everything, I realized how quickly people turn away. I wanted to see if anyone would still look at me and see a person, not just a problem. And you did." Sarah stepped closer. You don't have to keep searching anymore, you know. You've seen what kindness can do. Maybe it's time to stop looking for good people and start being one yourself. David let out a small chuckle. You think I haven't already? She raised an eyebrow. Not fully. You've been watching from the sidelines. Maybe it's time to get involved. David considered her words. For so long, he had been moving from place to place, searching for something he hadn't even been sure existed. But here, in this small town, he had found it. And now, Sarah was offering him something more, a purpose beyond just testing others. All right, he said finally. Where do you need me? Sarah grinned. Everywhere. In the weeks that followed, David became more than just an observer. He helped at the Haven, working alongside Sarah and the volunteers, using his own experiences to connect with those who walked through the doors. He had spent so long searching for proof that kindness still existed, and now he was part of it. Months later, as the center thrived and the town's attitude slowly shifted, David handed Sarah a small envelope one evening. She frowned. What's this? He smirked. My first donation as an official volunteer. She opened it and found another check, a generous amount, but not a test this time. Just a gift, a choice. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, David. He nodded. No, thank you. As she tucked the envelope into her pocket, she realized something. This hadn't just been a test of kindness. It had been a reminder that even the smallest acts of goodness could lead to something much bigger. And as long as people like David existed, people willing to change, to believe, to give, there was still hope. The Haven was only the beginning. Sarah's story proves that even the smallest act of kindness can create a lasting impact. What do you think about her decision? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Your support keeps these stories alive.